Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this webinar, All Your IELTS Questions Answered. You're very welcome here this evening, and I hope that the questions that I'm going to address and give you some answers to are ones that either you've asked me or are ones that you are thinking about and perhaps even have some doubts about. And having doubts might just distract you in your exam, which is why it's really important to get all your questions answered before you go into the test. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bernie Wall, and I'm an IELTS trainer, and I run the website IELTS Learning Tips. I also have a language training site at advanced level, which I use with all my IELTS students, called Gap Fillers. And together with my team of English language trainers, we deliver online training in IELTS to many, many students across the world, primarily to those who are looking at Band 7 and 8. I was myself an IELTS examiner for about 5 years, so I have quite an insight into the IELTS exam, both from a preparation point of view and also from an examiner's point of view. And what I want to do this evening is to go through some of the questions that I get asked a lot by my own students that I'm training and that are being trained by my team, but also from many other students who perhaps don't train with us but still have lots of questions. And I know over the 20 odd years that I've been training in IELTS, these questions keep coming up again and again. And some of the questions this evening are ones that you have posed to me as well. So I hope you get your questions answered. If your question doesn't come up this evening, then feel free to email it to me or put it in the IELTS Learning website, and we'll try and get an answer to you. But the ones I'm going to address are ones that do get asked a lot. So hopefully they are the questions that you're thinking about as we speak. This Hangout today, this webinar, is the third in my series on revision. And by that, I mean looking at the last sort of 2-3 weeks before your test and making sure that you are really well prepared. If you've already looked at the previous two webinars, you'll know that the first one was about practical things to do in terms of study, so that you are absolutely as prepared as you can be before you go into the test on the final day. And the second webinar covered how to be mentally prepared and how to boost and increase your confidence, so that again, when you go into the exam, you will be absolutely ready from a confidence point of view, so that if anything happens in the exam, that knocks you a little, you can recover quickly and not lose anything. Sometimes you might think you've done the listening badly and that affects your reading. And it's important that you're able to recover very quickly from any question you don't manage to get, so that you can go on and not lose too many marks. Okay, so I'm going to get started now. I've got all the questions up on a PowerPoint, so I'm going to share my screen with you and put those questions up so that you can see them there. I'm just looking for the relevant page and then we'll get going. Okay, so they should be coming up very shortly. Okay. So I'm not quite sure where that is. There we go. I'll go back to this first slide. So as I mentioned before, the name of this webinar is All Your IELTS Questions Answered. And I hope, as I say, to go through some of these and give you the answers so that you're not thinking about these as you go into the exam. So, do you have any doubts or questions about the exam? Perhaps your exam is 2 or 3 weeks away, maybe a month away, but there are maybe a few things that you're thinking about, wondering about. If they are practical things like you know, how is the room laid out, or do I use headphones? Those are questions you need to ask the centre, because every centre is different. So if there are any questions you have at all about administration, just give the centre a call where you're taking your exam and ask them those questions, so that when you go in, I had an email from a student just a few days ago who went into his exam having always practiced with headphones, to find that it was just an open speaker, and that threw him a little bit. So if you think a change of how the exam is going to look from how you've done your practice might affect your performance, then just give them a ring and ask those questions. The questions I'm going to deal with today are really to do with preparation. They're to do with the language side and the actual skills and preparation for the exam itself, not what happens on the day. So if you do have doubts or questions, and you have any concerns around how much you've prepared or how well you've prepared, then you're in the right place, because that's what I'm going to talk about this evening. So I want you to have a look at this very carefully. I think we all worry about looking silly or looking stupid if we have a question that we think most other people will know the answer to. I've had this myself. If I've been in a training course or in a conference and I've had a question, and there's always that feeling that perhaps this question is going to be seen to be a bit silly. But over my years as a teacher, and I've been teaching for well over 30 years, 35, 36 years, I've noticed that if one person has a question, there are definitely 2 or 3 other people who have that exact same question. So there is no such thing as a silly question. There's always going to be somebody else who has the same question as you. So you need to just be brave and ask it, rather than worrying about it, because the more you worry about it, the bigger the problem becomes, and that can be a huge distraction when you're trying to focus on your exam. So if there's anything at all, you must try and get the answer so that you can put it out of your mind and just focus on the tasks that you need to do. Now, the questions that are going to come up in this webinar are very common questions, and they are ones that I've been asked over and over and over from 20 years ago until very, very recently. And I've tried as far as possible to group them and organize them according to similarity, but some of them are a little random, so I hope you'll forgive that. I'm going to answer each one as fully as I can, but obviously, we only have limited time here. So to get through everything that's associated with that question, and you'll see that some of them are quite broad indeed. So I would not have time in this 1 hour of webinar to get through everything. So at the end of the webinar, I'm going to show you a way in which you can get all of your questions and more answered fully, and also get some support so that you can go much more in depth with your questions, your skills, your preparation, and everything else concerned just with your IELTS, so that when you go into your exam in 2 or 3 weeks' time, you won't have any doubts and you'll know exactly what to do. So let's have a look at the first question. This is very, very common. This refers particularly to the writing and the listening. And spelling is important. It's a part of English. It's a very tricky part of English because we don't spell as we speak. So for some students, this can be quite a difficult area. I have to say, for most English people starting to learn to read and write at school, it is a tricky area too. And we spend, I would say, most of our primary school English time learning spellings. So it is something that you do need to memorize. Okay, will you lose marks? In the writing, yes. You will definitely lose marks if you spell words incorrectly. Those words that are incorrectly spelled will be points that you lose. So it will make a big difference to your writing. In listening, it depends. If it is an unusual word that you hear, not a common word or a common name, then generally speaking, they will accept any spelling that is close. But for all of the common words, and particularly any words that are spelt out in part 1, you have to spell it correctly. So the key thing here is try, and if you have a problem with spelling, it's something you need to address. It's something you need to work on, because you can definitely lose marks if you make spelling errors. Okay, something that's kind of related is about grammar. Do you need to check your grammar? Yes, you do. Now, the grammar refers to all 4 parts of the exam, because grammar features in all of them. So let me take each one in turn. Let's start with the writing. Of course, grammar is probably more important in writing than anything else. You have to have the grammar correct. Most students who are trying to get band 7 or 7.5, I find once the organization, the vocabulary, the approach to the question has been mastered, the one area that still brings people down to 6.5 is their grammar. So if you're struggling at 6.5 and you keep getting 6.5, it could be that you need to address your grammar, because that's most likely to be the issue. So grammar is very important in writing. I can't overstress that. You have to be able to construct your sentences properly. You have to be able to agree your subject and your verb. You have to be able to use the right prepositions, and you have to be able to use gerunds where you need to, etc., etc. So grammar is definitely important. In speaking, it's important too. So obviously, if you make some grammar errors, you may get marked down a little, but it's not as important in the writing. Speaking is a test of communication. So what's more important there is the fluency. Grammar is important, but if you make 1 or 2 grammar errors, it's not going to be such a huge thing. If you make lots and lots of grammar errors, then that's a different matter, and that could easily see your score go down. But aim for fluency. If you know grammar well, if you're a band 7 speaker, then if you aim for the fluency, if you tell the story and focus on the question and give a good answer, then you'll find that your grammar and vocabulary will follow. If you're a band 5 student and you're looking to get band 6, then probably grammar is one of the areas you should look at in speaking. So a lot depends on where you are and what you're looking for. In listening and reading, grammar features in certain types of question. So if you are asked to fill a gap in a sentence, then absolutely the grammar is important. It has to be correct. If you're asked to complete a sentence, then again, the grammar is important because it becomes part of that completed sentence. So you need to address it. If you're looking at summaries in the writing, then grammar will help you to choose the right word. And sometimes if it's a word from the text, you might have to adapt it slightly and change it to a noun or a verb in order for it to fit the sentence that you're putting it into. So those kinds of questions all need a little bit of attention to grammar. In the listening, the key thing is to get the answers down as you listen, but when you transfer your answers, you have time then to check the grammar. Look and see whether articles are included in the sentence, because if they are, you don't need to repeat them. But if they are not, and it's clearly a singular noun, for example, you would need to put in an article at or the. So these are the things to be careful of. And I know lots of students who lose marks in their practice, certainly, and I'm sure in the exam, from not paying attention to the grammar. Okay, so I hope that covers it. You cannot ignore these 2 things. And punctuation is another area. This really refers to writing and listening. In writing, yes, it's important. You need especially to be able to do paragraphing, to be able to do capital letters, full stops. You need some use of commas. Don't overdo the commas. Sometimes I find students do overdo the commas, but make sure you understand the rudiments of punctuation, because one of the descriptors is punctuation. So the examiners are definitely going to be looking at that. In listening, I'm told that punctuation is not so important. Now, I'm thinking here about capital letters, and what I hear is that if you write a word with a small letter and it should be a capital, you're unlikely to lose marks. I'm not 100% sure about that, because the convention of English is that certain words like names and places should have capital letters. And if you know the conventions, then use the conventions. Again, don't worry about it while you're listening, but as soon as you transfer your answers, think about it then. In the earlier parts, maybe like in part 1, part 2, it's quite possible that the examiner is not so concerned about punctuation. But as you get towards part 3 and part 4, where you're expected to give better answers and better performance, then it could be that if you make some basic, and we're really only talking about capital letters in the listening, that if you make some basic errors, you may lose marks. So if you know it should have a capital letter, just write it with a capital letter. Okay, let's move on. So here are some different types of question about writing. I get lots and lots of questions about writing. So how can you find ideas? Okay, on the day of your test, there's only one place to find ideas, and that's in your head. It has to be. So you need to make sure that when you get to the exam, you can get ideas out of your head, because there is no way you can research. Now, one way of making sure you can do that is to do research in your preparation phase. So while you're preparing and you have a particular task 2 topic, then research it. It will give you some vocabulary. It will give you some ideas. But I would say as you get to within 2-3 weeks of your exam, you should stop researching, because you cannot rely, you have to rely on what's in your head. You cannot research anymore. Don't put too much emphasis on the ideas. They are not the most important thing in writing. And the second question that I'm putting here, which I get a lot, is how can I use my ideas? You can't. The examiner will not be impressed by your ideas on their own. The examiner will only be impressed by the way that you express those ideas in good, clear English. And if you're looking for band 7 and 8, in sophisticated, academic and objective English. So the ideas themselves have very little importance so long as they fit well with the question. What's really important is how you express them, how you persuade the examiner, how you support your ideas, and how you give evidence around your ideas. And all of that comes down to language, language, language. So the ideas themselves, don't worry about them so long as you have 2 for each paragraph. But do worry about the language you use to express the ideas. That's what will get you band 7. And again, related to writing, task 1, how can I organize the data? Okay, the first thing to do is to look at the data and see what the patterns are. You need to work out what you're going to put in the first paragraph, what you're going to put in your second paragraph, because typically task 1 will have a 1-sentence introduction, 1 paragraph of data, a second paragraph of data, and then maybe at the beginning or the end a sentence about an overall trend. So your decision here is what am I going to put in my first paragraph? What am I going to put in my second paragraph? Often there are 2 or 3 choices on this. There are 2 or 3 ways of doing it. My advice is to choose the easiest. So if it's, say, data about men and women, it may be easier to put men in one paragraph, women in another. If it's data about two different age groups, it's probably easier to deal with one age group in paragraph 1 and the other age group in paragraph 2, depending on how the data is organized and presented to you. But make it easy, because the hard job you have is the language and what language to use, and making sure you have good vocabulary, good linking words, variety of sentence structure. So that's where your focus should be in the exam. So organizing the data needs to be simple so that you can do that effectively. And the timing and the length, okay. If you have a lot of data, clearly you won't be able to address all of it in 150 words and 20 minutes. So you have to be selective. So always look at an overall trend. Is there an overall trend that I can talk about in one sentence? You don't need more than that. Then what's the highest? What's the lowest? Is there anything that's very significant? And those are the things you need to point out. And the rest of it you can put in groups. So you can group things around similar number, or you can group things in a range. So say from 5% to 7%, for example. But think about grouping data where you've got a lot of data, particularly in tables. Don't try and write 300 words, because if you do that, you've taken away the time from task 2. And remember, task 2 carries more weight. So you don't want to jeopardize your task 2 for your task 1. So don't go over 150, maybe 170 words maximum, and make sure that you group your data so that you're just talking about the most important, and then the rest can just go in a group. Okay, I hope that's helpful with writing. Here are some more questions. Right. We have an expression in English which is, how long is a piece of string? Well, how long is a piece of string is how long you need it to be. And this is the case with practice. How long do you need your practice to be? And that really depends on where you are now. So if you are, say, band 7 in some parts and 6.5 in other parts, let's say you get 2 7s, 2 6.5s, then you may be able to get up to 7 fairly quickly, maybe within 5 or 6 weeks, depending on what the issues are. If you are band 5.5 and you're looking for 7, then it's going to take a lot longer, clearly, and it's going to take more time of practice. So firstly, where you are now. Secondly, how much practice time do you have? I mean, can you manage 2 hours a day? If you can manage 2 hours a day, then that will push you along much faster. If you can only manage 2 hours a week, it's going to take longer. How committed are you to getting band 7? How important is band 7? Is it vital? Will you not be able to move on without band 7? Because having that kind of pressure sometimes motivates you to do more. And finally, how much support do you get? So if you're working with a teacher or you're in a class, it's going to be much, much faster, because a lot of the learning that you need to do will be presented to you by the teacher. You won't have to discover it for yourself. So all of those factors come into play. And so therefore, it's very difficult to say how much practice you need. The only person who can tell you that is a person who's working with you. And then they'll be able to say, well, look, we need to improve here, there. So that's probably going to take however long. If you're struggling with writing, I will warn you that writing takes longer than the other parts to improve. So if writing is the thing that's holding you back, you really need to address it, and you need to address it in a very firm way, because writing is the one that will develop more slowly than the other 3 parts of the test. Okay. I would say you can't, not easily. If you don't have any time to study, there is only one solution, and that is you need to be living and working in English. Now, if you're doing that every day, then there's a chance that you could get a reasonable score. And if you're working and living in English in a fairly high level job, then there's a good chance that you could get a high level, a band 7, for example. But you would still need to address writing, because we very rarely do the kind of writing that you have to do for IELTS in a daily job. If you're studying in England or in Australia or Canada, or etc., if you're studying in an English-speaking country and you're living and with students who do not speak much of your own language, then you probably could have a good stab at it. But if you're not in that situation, then you won't do well if you don't study. You really won't. Okay. Right, this again is difficult. The one surefire way to improve speaking and listen is to listen and speak. The more you speak, the more you practice, the better you'll become. Remember, I said earlier, this is about fluency. If you're not fluent, then your score will not be high. And the way to get fluent is to practice regularly. It is possible wherever you are, because you can find people to speak on Skype with. My students who are following any of my courses have access to my private Facebook group. And in that private Facebook group, which is only for people who are on my courses, there are lots of students who are looking to set up speaking sessions on Skype. And even though those students are not native speakers, they are all at band 7, band 8. And so that practice is very, very valuable. And that's in addition to the practice that they do when they're working with me or one of my team of teachers, and when we're on Skype. So, you know, you have to find a way to study. There are, I'm sure, other sites where you can hook up with other people to practice your English. And if you're not practicing speaking at all, I suggest you go out and Google sites for practicing English. It doesn't have to be IELTS speaking. It could be just general English speaking. It will help also. Otherwise, you're going to struggle. Okay. So let's move on to some more strange questions. This is a question I get asked a lot. And in fact, somebody asked it just last week in an email to me. Actually, technically, no. All centres in all countries should be exactly the same. They should offer every candidate the same experience. Now, having said that, I am sure that you know people who've changed centre or even changed country and passed the exam. But you probably also know people who've changed country or changed centre and not passed the exam. So that tells us that really it's not the answer. There's more to it. I remember many years ago when I was learning to drive, and I took my test at a particular centre with a particular driving examiner, and I didn't pass. And I practiced more, went back to the centre, and lo and behold, I got the same examiner again. Now, this man wasn't a very friendly examiner, and he kind of made you feel nervous. And as a consequence, the second time I didn't pass again either. So the third time I decided to go to a different centre. Now, when I went to that different centre, I did pass. That could have been also something to do with my driving skills, which had also improved in that time. But psychologically, I had a block with that particular examiner. And I think that can happen, that if you've been to a centre 2 or 3 times, you might develop a psychological block. And going back to that centre will just make you more nervous. And then you may feel more confident if you go to a different centre. And that's valid if you can do it. Don't make life difficult. Don't make it so that you have to travel at 2 o'clock in the morning for miles and miles and miles to get there, because that's not going to do you any good. On the other hand, I know somebody who took the exam 13 times at the same centre And when she was absolutely ready for the scores, she got it with the same examiner. So there is no hard and fast rule. It really depends on the situation. Okay, right. Doing tests over and over is not really the answer to improving your score. The problem is that the practice here is very restricted. And if you're just sitting at home doing an IELTS test, checking your scores, and then doing another one, checking your scores, how are you going to improve? Because whenever you do a test and you check your scores, you need to use that data, those scores, to help you improve. And if you're just doing tests over and over and over, you're not going to improve. So when you've done a test, look at the scores and look at what it's telling you. Is it telling you that you're losing marks in a particular section, like, say, reading section 3? Because if you're always losing marks in reading section 3, then you need to find out why that's happening. Is it because section 3 is too hard and you need to practice it so that it's not too hard? Or is it perhaps because you're spending too much time on section 1 and 2 and you need to make those faster so that you have more time for section 3? So you have to diagnose your results and why this is happening, and not just keep going on a treadmill of test after test after test. I have seen tests where they have had yes, no, not given, or true, false, not given in each part of the test, in section 1, section 2, and section 3 of the reading. And I've known students who did not like that type of question because they found them too difficult and they didn't score well. Now, if you have a test with 3 sets of yes, no, not given, true, false, not given, potentially you can lose 15 marks. And if you lose 15 marks, you are not going to get band 7. So the key there is not to keep doing lots of tests, but it is to go and work on yes, no, not given and true, false, not given, so that you can improve that particular type of exercise. Then you have a chance of improving your score. So just doing tests is not a good idea. And in fact, I wouldn't do any tests at all until you get close to the exam, say within 2 weeks, 3 weeks of the exam. The rest of it should be spent on improving your skills. And if you look at any IELTS course book, you'll see that they split up the different types of question. And so some chapters of the book will deal with yes, no, not given and headings, and another will deal with summaries, the same with the listening. The same with the writing. They'll deal with an introduction, how to write an introduction, because we need to break it down so that we can get good at each part. Okay. The answer here is probably not. If I were to write a task 2, say, IELTS, I'm a native speaker, and I'm also very well versed in IELTS because I've been teaching it for a long time. And I would probably get the same score whether I wrote 250 words, 350 words, or 450 words, because I'm very unlikely to make any mistakes. So the only area in which the examiner might criticize me might be in my style. They might not like the way that I write. They might not like my vocabulary, for example. But in terms of things like organization and grammar, I'm unlikely to make a mistake. On the other hand, if you're a second speaker and you're typically working around band 7, there is a very big danger in writing more than 250 words. And that danger is that the more you write, the more potential there is for mistakes. So if the more you write, the less control you have over your sentence structure and your vocabulary. So don't think if I write 300 words, I'll show the examiner more. In fact, if you write 300 words, you might be showing the examiner where your potential for mistakes is. So control is very important in both tasks 1 and 2 in writing. So stick to the guidelines. They will allow you to write effectively, accurately, and give you time to plan and to check. And both of those things are important. So I would say 250, 280 maximum, 150, 180 maximum on the task one. And don't write any more, and spend your time planning, controlling your writing, and checking just to see if there are any small mistakes you can eliminate before you hand over your script. Okay, let's move on. So timing is a big thing. Of course, reading and writing. Okay, timing in the reading, cut out anything that's not going to help you. You don't need to read the whole passage before you start on the questions. You just need an overview. You can get that from the title, first paragraph, or maybe a quick skim. Spend more time on the questions, use the keywords, and then use the keywords to find the place. Then practice those techniques. If you look on my blog, you'll find under the reading section, there is a list of how to approach the reading. But knowing about the techniques and the strategies is not enough. You have to practice. And the more you practice, the more the timing problem goes away. Because once you know what to do, you will do it quickly, automatically. And then there is no problem with time. If I'm doing a reading test myself from scratch, it typically takes me about 30 minutes to do all three. And I will probably have at maximum 1-2 mistakes, or 2 things that I'm not absolutely sure about. Let's say not mistakes necessarily. So, you know, if you practice all these techniques that you read about or people tell you about, then you will be able to improve that timing quite dramatically. And in fact, the timing will no longer be a problem. The same thing is true in the writing. If you learn how to write at band 7, if you know what kind of vocabulary, what kind of structures, if you know how to plan your essay well, then you will be able to write it quite comfortably within the time. It's knowing exactly what's required. It's knowing the kind of vocabulary and structure, how to organize your paragraphs, how to make sure you've got a good variety. And all of that you can learn about in course books. Have a look again on my blog. There's a lot about writing. You can find out from teachers. Teachers are the best way to this because they can really cut a lot of corners and get you there much, much faster. Okay. And other questions I'm asked about skills in listening. Okay, so how can you improve your listening? I mentioned before about speaking and listening. You have to do them. Speaking and listening are what we call productive skills. That means that you actually produce something. So you produce speech, or you hear something and you acknowledge that. In the IELTS, it's by writing. In real life, it's probably by responding. So the speaking is not just about speaking, it's about listening and speaking. So the best way to improve your listening skills is to listen. Listen, listen, listen to anything. Doesn't matter what it is. It could be music radio, it could be songs, it could be chat shows, it could be, you know, podcasts are very, very good. Be a little careful of using video and TV for listening because only a small percentage comes through your ears and a lot is visual. So fine, watch videos and films. Put English subtitles on if you can, because that helps where you might lose the thread. But try also to balance that with some listening from podcasts, from radio, so that you get a good range of listening. And if you can, use some listening exercises, because in the IELTS, it's not just general listening comprehension. You have to find individual words, individual phrases, and you need what we call discrimination of listening in order to do that, which means you listen to 2 or 3 sentences and you have to pick out some small pieces of information. So where you can, listen to exercises in listening discrimination. And I have lots that I use in all of my courses, which really help to improve this skill. And I think I mentioned this a lot before. The only way to improve skills in speaking is to speak. It's not enough to listen to people speaking. It's not enough to watch YouTube of people doing the speaking test. It's not enough to read things about speaking. It's not even enough to speak to yourself in the mirror, although that helps. That helps with things like pronunciation and fluency, and it definitely helps with part 2. So part 2 you can do by yourself. You can record yourself, you can practice it yourself, because it's like a speech. But part 1 and part 3 has to be interaction. So if you're not getting an interaction, you're not going to be able to improve your skills as much as you need to. So all the things I mentioned before about finding partners to speak to, if you haven't got a speaking group, why not start one? Find your friends who are doing IELTS and say, right, let's have a speaking group. We'll meet twice a week. So, you know, be proactive and find some things to do. Okay, so those are all the questions that that I've been asked. I hope that your questions were in amongst those. If again you look at my blog, there are some more questions that come up on some of those posts, and you might find others there. So your exam is coming up. It's in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. What can you do? Make sure that you have all your questions answered, and I hope tonight that I've managed to do that for you. But there are some other things that you need to address. So if you've practiced a lot, but you still have some doubts, then try and get some support. So find someone who can help you with those doubts. Don't go into the exam with question marks in your head, because it's only going to distract you and it's only going to worry you. If you haven't practiced enough, then you absolutely need to get some support, because going into the exam without proper preparation is not a nice experience. You want to go in there really thinking, right, I'm going to show that examiner what I can do in English, not, oh, I hope I don't get too difficult a question. That shouldn't be your priority. You should be ready to answer every question, whatever it is. And finally, if you really don't know where you are, so if you're in the panic group, your exam's coming in 2-3 weeks and you're panicking because you haven't practiced enough, you don't know what your score is going to be, you really don't know what to do. If that's you right now, then you must get some support, because otherwise on the exam day, it's going to be quite difficult to keep focused, honestly. And I've seen students in each of these situations. I've seen students who were really well prepared, ready to go, but they were lacking something, and they just needed that extra sort of confidence or that extra bit of practice that made sure they were ready. I've seen students who are panicking because they've had too much work in their office or too much study in something else, and they just didn't have time to prepare properly. And they're saying, what can I do now? What can I do now? There is some way that you can get help with that. And finally, if you're completely panicking, get some help, because it's not a good way to go into the exam. Okay, so the best way of filling in all these gaps is to find an expert teacher who can very calmly explain to you what you have to do, what you don't have to do, etc. And if you're in any of those 3 groups I mentioned earlier, and you'd like some help within the next 2 to 3 weeks before your exam, then I've got something very special that I can offer you to really help you be certain on the day of your exam that you have covered all bases and there are no areas that you haven't addressed. So this is intensive teacher-led study. By intensive, it means every day. The minimum you need to do this is 2 weeks, but if you have 3 weeks, it will also work, and it will give you then, it's slightly more relaxed if you can do it over 3 weeks. But it's quite possible to do 2 weeks intensive revision with a teacher. What I'm offering is private. That means your own personal teacher, IELTS teacher. It's not a group, it's one-to-one. and they will support you through the last 2 to 3 weeks before your exam. You'll get work to do every day, and this is specifically IELTS test revision work. We're not talking general English now, because 3 weeks before your exam is too late to start doing a lot of general English. It's still okay to do it. It will supplement, but you really need exam focus. And you'll get this to do every day for the time that you're working with the teacher, and they will give you feedback every day on this. And you'll also meet on Skype and have lessons on Skype where you can ask all your questions, talk about all your doubts, and where the teacher will show you in all of your work exactly where you might be losing marks, where you might be lacking a bit of confidence, and show you exactly what you have to do, and also tell you if there's something that you're doing that you shouldn't be doing that will actually cause a problem. So all of that is discussed on Skype with your own personal teacher. And the name of this program is IELTS Exam Booster. It's revision. It's a last-minute revision course where we give you the final boost so that you can go into the exam on the day feeling confident, knowing exactly what to do, and not having any doubts. And so it's a really good way of getting into that exam ready and raring to go. So actually, I think the best possible way. Why would you not want to sit with a teacher every day? And by sit, I mean it's online. So every day, getting advice, getting help, being told how to improve your skills. You'll know what your scores are. So you'll know what you're getting in listening and reading and writing and speaking. And not only that, if the score needs to improve, you'll be able to practice that. You'll be able to change a little so that you can improve that score. You'll be looking at the areas where you might be losing marks, and you may not know these. Sometimes people are very surprised by how they lose marks in the exam. And you'll get this constant daily advice right up to the day of your exam. And this will help you to feel more confident. And you'll know pretty much how you should perform in the exam. You know, you'll know what your reading score should be, your listening score, etc. And you'll be able over the 2-3 weeks to actually build on that and get it higher. And I've seen this work with lots of students where they've managed to gain 2 or 3 marks at least on their listening, and that could be the difference between a 7 and a 6.5, or between a 7.5 and an 8, if that's what you're looking for. So, and the exam can be found, the information on this can be found at IELTSlearningtips.com/IELTS exam booster. And I'm just going to have a look at this if I can find it very briefly to show you, whoops, if I can find it, which I don't seem to be able to at the moment. Right, just bear with me. I'll try and get it up here. No, it was there a minute ago. Right, let's just see if I... Sorry about this. I had it up there, but it seems to have... Okay, there we go. I found it now. So as I said before, it's 2 to 3 weeks. And it will help you. You can look at this later if you follow the link on the screen. And here are some people who took the exam and got the score that they want. I just wanted to look here at how it works. So we block it. So you'll start and do some listening, and you get feedback on the listening. And then after 2 lots of feedback, you have a Skype lesson where you will focus on listening. Look at where your listening is. If your listening is fantastic, then the teacher will also use time in that lesson to do some speaking practice or something else. Because obviously, if your listening is fantastic, you want to look at the areas which are maybe not quite so good. Then you move on to reading, and you'll do the same. You'll have reading practice. You'll get the feedback from all the reading, and this happens every day. And then you have another Skype call, another lesson with your teacher where you can talk about the reading. And again, look at the, you can also look at the speaking in this call. Then again, we look at your writing. You send your writing and the teacher will give you some very detailed feedback and a score. And then you will be on Skype again to talk about your writing. And then finally, you have 2 speaking sessions. If your speaking is absolutely fantastic, but you need to do a little bit more writing, then you can use that to talk about the writing or do some more writing. If you need more speaking, so really it's individual. And if there's one area you need more help with and another area you don't, then that can be flexible. Now, for the next 3 days, you can get this course for $497. The normal price is $697. But because we want to help anybody who's got their exam coming up in the next 2 to 3 weeks, we are making this very special offer. But in order to get started and maximize the time and get the most benefit, you need to act quickly. And quite frankly, those people who act very quickly normally get the best results. So those that make quick decisions usually end up getting the best result from that decision. So you have 3 days in which to join this course. You'll have your own teacher. When you join the course, you'll immediately get the program with all the listenings and readings and writings. And you will also have an email from your IELTS teacher who will introduce themselves and fix up the first of your 5 Skype lessons. And then on that Skype lesson, you can fix up the second one, etc. So it's great value. It's a way of making sure that that last little hurdle or that last rush to the exam is going to be spent in a very beneficial and useful way. And we've had some good results from this program. And if you go to this page, you'll be able to see what these students are saying about their experience on the exam booster, IELTS exam booster. If you have any doubts at all, or you're not sure if it's for you, then you can email me and I'll try and help you to decide. But remember, this is only going to be around for 3 days. So you need to really make a decision quickly. Make sure that the next 2 to 3 weeks before your exam are spent in the best possible way with somebody behind you, helping you to maximize everything you do to get the score that you want. So I'm just going to close that down now, and I'll come back into the Hangout because our time is up. And I hope that that was useful. If, as I mentioned before, there are any questions there that didn't get answered for you, I'm sorry about that. I picked out the most common ones that came in. But if there are any that didn't get answered, then please feel free to drop me a line via email and send me those. If you go to my IELTS Learning Tips website, then you'll find a place where you can do that. And I wish you good luck with your exam, whenever that may be. But remember, if you are 2 to 3 weeks away and you still have some doubts, or you don't feel you've practiced enough, or you haven't practiced at all, then go to that page, IELTS Learning Tips /IELTS Exam Booster, and then you can sign up and you can start as soon as tomorrow or the day after on that final push of preparation before your exam. Thank you very much for coming to this webinar. And I wish you, as I said before, good luck in your exam. And I would really love to see some of you on the Exam Booster course. Thank you. Bye-bye.